The nights are long, the days are short, and the weather is chilly to downright cold, depending on where you are. It's a good time to slip into a Quince iconic Mongolian cashmere sweaters, which start at only $50. You can treat yourself to everyday luxury at an affordable price with Quince. If you really want to dive into luxury, you can check out their leather handbags, washable silk shirts, and European linen sheet sets. Whatever you're looking for at Quince, all the prices are 50 to 80% less than similar brands, and they do that by partnering directly with top factories and cutting out the middleman. They only work with factories that use safe, ethical, and responsible manufacturing processes. And of course, they use premium fabrics and finishes for that luxury feel in every piece. But you've already heard me rave about my Quince travel pants. Treat yourself this winter without the luxury price tag. Go to quince.com/traveler for 365-day returns plus free shipping on your order. That's QUINCE.com/traveler to get free shipping and 365-day returns. Quince.com/traveler. And thanks to Quince for sponsoring this episode of Amateur Traveler.
Ever met a foundation that does it all? Say hi to NARS Light Reflecting Foundation. Makeup meets skincare in a bottle. It evens skin tone, blurs imperfections, and has a natural radiant finish. Plus, it's formulated with skincare ingredients to help strengthen your skin's barrier. With a newly expanded shade range of over 40 radiant shades to choose from and buildable all-day wear. NARS Light Reflecting Foundation. Find your perfect match.
Amateur Traveler, episode 910. Today, the Amateur Traveler talks about castles and minarets, wooden churches and a humorous graveyard, King Charles and Vlad the Impaler, as we go to Romania and Southern Hungary. This is Chris Christensen from Amateur Traveler. Let's talk about Romania. I'd like to welcome to the show Lisa VanderVeen from LisaVanderVeenWrites.com, who's come to talk to us about Romania. Lisa, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much. I'm so happy to be here.
And you, longtime listener to the show, so you know how we play our game here.
Yep.
What is your connection with Romania?
I went to Romania this past summer, so that would have been July of 2024, on an Intrepid trip with Intrepid Travel. Mm-hmm. I've done several trips with them, and I really love the way they set up their trips.
Yeah, we've done most of the Amateur Traveler trips have been with them, so I've obviously had some good experiences with them as well. And why should someone go to Romania?
Romania is much more than Dracula and Vlad Tepes, though I will confess that was my initial draw to the country. It's got a great diversity of landscape and a multi-layered history going way, way back, and then also as recently as the communist times. Lots of really interesting museums to visit. In terms of the topography and the geography, it's got beautiful towns. The Maramures region has a history of weavings and just the colors, red, orange, pink, and blue, with the haystacks dotting the rolling hills and the mountains in the backdrop are really stunning. The Carpathian Mountains are moody and they're filled with lore, and at the same time, they feel a little bit like Switzerland. There's great beauty, great history, and wonderful food and wine in Romania.
Excellent. What itinerary are you going to lay out for us here?
Sure. So Intrepid had us starting in Budapest. So I flew into Budapest.
Which is not in Romania.
No, it is not in
Romania. And we're aware of that, just so we don't get the emails.
Yes. To be more specific, this was Northern Hungary and Romania, this trip. But more focus on the Romania, just a little bit of Northern Hungary. But I love Budapest. I've been there before. It was a joy to start the tour there and then to move on to Eger, Hungary.
Before you move on, you mentioned before we started recording that Budapest is your favorite European city. Why is it your favorite?
I love the lights in the Danube River at night. I love the architecture that lines the city. I love the Fisherman's Bastion and the castle and the bridges. The bridges are so beautiful. The baths, obviously, are so special. And it's just a really walkable city. I love walkable cities. It's
Hmm.
fascinating to explore. You've had guests on here talking about the tunnel complexes under the castle.
Right.
There's so much. It's just such a rich city.
And did you get much chance on this trip? If you wanted to see Budapest, would you have to come in early?
You'd have to come in early. I
Okay.
only came in the day before. And I did see one new thing this time that I hadn't seen before, and that was the Museum in the Rock, I believe it's called.
I don't
It's
know
a
this.
hospital complex under the
Okay.
castle. And it's in that tunnel complex. And it was a really fascinating tour of World War I and II hospital complex that was later turned into a nuclear bunker.
Okay. Interesting. I did not know that one. I did not see that when I was there.
Yeah, it might be called the Hospital in the Rock, not the Museum in the Rock.
Okay. Excellent. And then you were eager to get us to Eager.
To Eager. I was eager to get to Eager. So we took a train, which is just under 2 hours from Budapest to Eager.
Hmm.
And it could be done as a day trip if you were staying in Budapest, but it's definitely worth spending an evening there and hitting up the wineries that are in Eager. I'm not a wine connoisseur in particular, but I do enjoy wine with dinner. And I didn't know what a rich wine history Hungary has. So we took the
Right.
train.
Before you go on there, when we were in Hungary on the amateur traveler trip in Budapest, we had done that with J-Way Travel, and they managed to pick a date for our trip so that we were in Budapest for a wine festival up in the castle, and where you can
Oh, cool.
try lots of different Hungarian wines. I believe it was in the fall. You go back to the episode that we did on that for sure, but it was a wonderful way to try some of the wines of the region, and they're not the wines I know. They're not the French wines, whatever. It's a different wine tradition there, but it was quite enjoyable. I did enjoy the Hungarian wines, but I didn't know them either.
Yeah, there's a wine cellar under a tasting room. I wonder
Hmm.
if that's where you were. It was under a
No,
Westin
we were in the
hotel at
courtyard.
the
We
time.
were right in the
Okay,
middle of the courtyard of the castle. It was a big event.
okay, cool. We took trains a bit throughout Hungary and Romania, and I will
Hmm.
say that there were some inconsistencies in the comfort level of the train. Some were very modern, some were a little shabbier, and so layers are a really good idea because some were super air conditioned and some had windows that rolled down and the heat was just wafting in. The train was easy to navigate.
You're an educator, so you're doing this in the summer, I'm guessing.
Yep. Yep, in July.
Okay.
Yeah. And it was warm. Definitely warm. So I think Eager is, as I said, you could do it as a day trip from Budapest, but there is a lot to see. So it was nice to have an evening there and a night. We stayed over for one night. It's a beautiful town with Baroque buildings. The architecture is really stunning. It's the northernmost point when the Ottomans took over
Okay.
Hungary. And it's actually known for that because they did a great job of holding the castle and turning them away in 1552, although they came back and were successful later. It has a very walkable city with a quaint center called Dobo Square, which was named for Istvan Dobo, who defended the city against the Ottomans in 1552. There are a lot of restaurants in that square, and it's just a nice place to sit and have an iced coffee or a snack or lunch. There's also a market in the square. We were there on a weekend, and I'm not sure the days of the week that the market is there, but there was a
Hmm.
market with lots of beautiful produce and souvenirs and handcrafts and that kind of thing. But it's a small town, a population of under 100,000. So it's not crowded and it felt really manageable, which was nice, especially coming from Budapest, which is a lot more crowded during the
Hmm.
summer. It is known for thermal baths. I did not visit a thermal bath in Eger because I have done them in Budapest, but they're known for their thermal baths. And they're also known for their astronomical museum, which has a camera obscura from 1776 that they used to use supposedly to spy on townspeople. So that was a fun
Okay.
visit.
So a camera obscura, which is a type of camera done with just a small opening
Yep,
that
a
displays
pinhole camera.
upside down in a darkened room.
Like,
How would that help you spy on people? That I
because
do
it
not
shows
know.
you a 360 degree view of the town.
Interesting.
So you can
Yeah, but
see who's
not
out.
zoomed in. It's not like a telescope or something.
No, but I guess back in 1776, that's what they had.
Okay. Interesting.
So there's also some beautiful churches to visit. I visited the Basilica of St. John the Apostle, which was a gorgeous church from the 1830s with beautiful painted dome and a good place to stop with air conditioning in the heat of the summer.
Got it.
But really, I think the heart of Eger is the castle and the wine. Like I said, the castle was used in the siege of Eger in 1552 when the Hungarians defeated the Ottomans. They came back in 1596. There is a minaret in town, and it's the northernmost minaret, Ottoman minaret in Europe. Intrepid had us stay at the Minaret Hotel right across the street from the minaret. So we had great views of that.
Okay.
And from up in the castle, there's just a really beautiful view of Dobo Square and the Baroque architecture. Again, it was the weekend and there were families up there having picnics and sitting on blankets and watching the cannons go off. And it was just a really interesting castle to visit. There's a museum there. When they had that 1552 siege and the Hungarians won, how do I say this? It ties into the history of wine because supposedly, and what the Ottomans were told who didn't drink, was that the Hungarians' red wine from the region was fortified with bull's blood. So they called their red wine bull's blood, and they derived extra strength from the fact that their wine supposedly had bull's blood in it. So that's the part of the history of the wine in that region. There are over 40 wine cellars in Eger. And so after we walked around during the day and visited the church and the astronomical museum and the castle, we went for a wine tasting. The wine area is called the Valley of Beautiful Women. The origin of that is unclear.
Okay.
A couple theories on that, potentially named after a goddess of the region, similar to Venus. Or another source said just a really nice woman who worked in one of the cellars. Another cited a local noblewoman, but at any rate, there's a statue of a woman and it's called the Valley of Beautiful Women. So we went to a family-owned wine cellar. It was one of the larger wine cellars, and I'm going to kill this name, but the Hagimasi Winery. It was number 19 in the street where they're all lined up. And we sampled a really nice assortment of white, sparkling rosé and red wines. I didn't taste any bull's blood in the red wine, but it was quite robust and delicious.
Okay.
And to be noted is that when you're in Northern Hungary and Romania, a very common snack, and one that we had with our wine tasting that was not cheese and crackers or charcuterie that one might expect in Napa Valley, we had bread with lard and onions on top.
Huh. Okay. Cooked onions or raw onions?
Raw.
Huh. Okay.
It was a little counterintuitive, but hey, it works. Yeah, so the wines, the white and rosé, were super fresh. There was also a dessert wine. It was a really nice tasting, a really varied tasting. From there, we went to dinner and we sampled another favorite dish of the region, which is crispy pork knuckle.
Okay.
Which I found quite delicious, though I'm not sure where the knuckle is, whether it's an ankle or a knee or what part of the pig, but it was quite good with all the pickled things. We had raw pickled cabbage and pickles and pickled beets that all somehow went really well with the crispy pork knuckle. So that was the day we spent in Eger.
Got it. It almost makes me wonder that pork knuckle reminds me of a big German dish. And I see there is a German name for the town. And Europe before World War II was not as contiguous in terms of languages. There would be German pockets throughout different regions. And I wonder if this is one of those places, since there is a German name for the town, that had a German influence in it. Miners brought in or something like that.
I think that's right. And as I'll talk about later, in Romania, there's a big Saxon presence in Romania.
Exactly.
So I think that's probably true. There's a lot of crossover in all three of those countries. I ended up in Germany at the end of this trip, so there's a crossover in all of those countries in some of the cuisine.
Yeah, definitely.
So from Eger, we went to Maramures, which is a region. We took a train from Eger, took about 3.5 hours to a town called Debrecen in Hungary. We had one connection, and that was the super hot and sweaty train as opposed to the lovely air-conditioned train
Okay.
the day before. I would really recommend, if possible, doing carry-on only, because if you're going to take trains in Hungary and Romania, unlike some of the other countries in Europe, they didn't seem to have the luggage racks on the floor where you could just scoot your suitcase in. You had to actually lift them overhead, and I had a big suitcase. It wasn't huge, but it wasn't a carry-on, and it never would have fit in an airplane carry-on. So definitely, I wished I had carry-on only in those trains, but it worked out.
I am one of those people who recommends carry-on only for pretty much all trips. So,
yeah, me too.
But it does mean you need to learn a little more about packing more compactly.
Absolutely.
Konnichiwa, I'm Yuki, a tour leader with Explore. Who knew that hidden among Tokyo's towering skyscrapers was a peaceful tea house surrounded by ancient trees and serene ponds? Actually, I knew. It was my mother's secret sanctuary. Not everyone knows about Tokyo's Hamarikyu Gardens. Arigatou gozaimasu. But you will if you explore. Search exploreworldwide.com and don't just travel, explore.
Hey there, Ryan Reynolds here. It's a new year, and you know what that means. No, not the diet. Resolutions. A way for us all to try and do a little bit better than we did last year. And my resolution, unlike big wireless, is to not be a raging and raise the price of wireless on you every chance I get. Give it a try at mintmobile.com/switch.
$45 upfront payment required, equivalent to $15 per month. New customers on first 3-month plan only. Taxes and fees extra. Speed slower above 40 gigabytes on unlimited. See mintmobile.com for details.
Because this was an Intrepid trip, we had a private transfer that picked us up at the train station in Debrecen, and we had lunch there and then drove to the Romanian border, which was about 20 miles from Debrecen. So just an overview on getting into Romania. Even though it's part of the EU, you do have to stop and show your passport when you're crossing at a land border. Our guide told us that Romania just doesn't have the developed tourist infrastructure of Western European countries yet, and so they're still having people stop and show passports. The upside of that is...
What that would mean, it would not be in the Schengen zone.
It is, though.
It is, though. Interesting.
Yeah. They joined in March 31st, 2024, so it looks like they're a new member.
Interesting.
And maybe that's why.
Yeah, so they just haven't taken down the borders yet, apparently. Interesting.
That could be why, yeah.
For those who don't know what I'm talking about, the Schengen zone is that region in Europe where one can cross the borders without showing a passport. And so it's odd to move from one Schengen country to another and have to show your passport. That's not the point. So, and it's something that's worthwhile knowing what they are. I remember taking a bus to the Prague airport, and we had to know where we were going because the two different terminals, one was Schengen and the other one was non-Schengen. And so it's helpful to know when you're traveling from country to country what the Schengen zone is. And you can look up, I'll put a link in the show notes to a map of the Schengen zone.
Yeah, they didn't stamp the passports. They just wanted to see them.
Interesting.
They also are using a currency called the LEW, L-E-W. Our guide told us that they haven't been approved yet for the euro, and they haven't met the standards that they need to meet to be approved for the euro. So you're going to want to withdraw some LEW from the ATM because credit cards are accepted, but not always. So it's a country that's really, you're not in France, say. It's
right.
A country it's not hard to navigate, but it's not quite as easy as some of the more Western European.
Although interesting, linguistically, you're going from a country of Hungary where you don't speak Hungarian probably unless you're of Hungarian descent to a country where the language is more similar to French because Romanian is a Romance language. So from that point of view, you're going to be a little easier to get around because Hungarian is like nothing else in Europe. Finnish, but...
Yeah, you could read some of the signs if you know some French. We also stopped for bottled water because our guide told us that we shouldn't drink the water in Maramures.
Okay.
So again, not something you'd necessarily do in some other European countries. Maramures is an absolutely beautiful region of Europe. There are a number of UNESCO sites. It is very picturesque. Small villages and pastures with these hive-shaped haystacks. They have deep traditions of wood churches and wood houses. And it's absolutely beautiful. It did remind me of Switzerland.
Mm-hmm.
We stayed at a wonderful guest house called I'm not going to do this justice, but the Pensiuna Ardeline in a small town called Vadu Ize. I can provide you with all of this for the
Please.
show notes. But so we walked into this fresh wooden sort of chalet, and it was all decorated with the local textiles, which are these beautiful weavings that I mentioned earlier with red and orange and pink. And from my bedroom window, it was misty. It rained a bit of the time that we were there. And so there were just these misty mountains, and you could hear sheep bells and roosters crowing. And there was an apple tree right outside my window, and I could smell the apples. And I'm from the Midwest originally, and it made me feel like I was at my ancestral farm. It was really lovely. Ramona is the hostess, and she cooked us meals every night from the beans in her garden, or she made chicken soup with dumplings. We had more pork and pickles, of course. It was so homey and lovely. And I did ask her if I came back, because I do want to go back on a trip that's not an Intrepid trip, if she could help me arrange a car and a guide locally and that kind of thing. And she said, absolutely. So she also does laundry if you can pay for her to do your laundry, which was a great service to have there. So we spent a very full day and a half touring a whole bunch of sites in Maramures. There's a beautiful monastery from the 1300s called Monasteria Barsana, which is a UNESCO site. So it was originally built in the 1300s, and it was destroyed by the Ottomans. They rebuilt it and finished in 1993, so fairly recently. And it's an Orthodox monastery inhabited by nuns, not monks.
Okay.
Its appearance is, it really looks like a hybrid of Swiss chalets and sort of Burmese temples with these spires that go up into the sky and the mountains behind it. It's really striking. There's a church on the property that has a gorgeous wood barrel ceiling and images of icons painted in earth tones. I was really struck by the diversity of churches in this area, because some of them are very rustic and simple, and some are more modern and very ornate and just really beautiful.
The look is more similar to me to the wooden staff churches of Scandinavia, because the whole building being wooden rather than stone or brick or something.
Yep. There's also a small but well-presented museum at the monastery with tools and textiles and garments from the region. And it's just a lovely sprawling property with flowers and bridges, and it's really pretty. So from there, we went to one of the wooden churches. There are 8 UNESCO wooden churches in Maramures, including this one, which was called St. Nicholas. I think it's Basilica de Lem, which I think means wood church, but this one was St. Nicholas.
Okay.
And this church was built in 1643. It was just very compact and cozy inside, very different from the huge basilicas that we also visited. Lots of those colorful local textiles draped inside on the railings, and it was really lovely. From there, we went to the Memorial of the Victims of Communism and the Resistance, which is also known as the Siget Prison. And that's a UNESCO site as well, built in 1897. Originally, it was just built as a prison for run-of-the-mill prisoners, but it turned into a maximum security prison for intelligentsia during the communist era. And you could spend a half day in there. There's 3 floors of cells, each commemorating someone who was imprisoned or died. They said about a quarter of the prisoners died. So everything was in Romanian, but they handed out English guides. So you would just go to the room that was numbered, the number on your guide, and it was very clear. It was very grim, but really interesting to read all the stories. So that's in a town called Siget, and there's little cafes and stuff. So if you want to have lunch at some point throughout the touring, we stopped and had a light lunch outside. And then we headed to my favorite spot in Maramures, which you had a guest touch on this about 9 years ago, I think, but the Mary Cemetery in Sapanta. It's 800 blue wooden crosses in a cemetery, and they show all of the story of the life and death and indiscretions of their inhabitants, often in limerick form.
Okay.
It's really beautiful. You walk into the cemetery and all of them are the same blue paint with the same sort of almost cartoonish, beautiful images. So an example that you might find is this poem from 1969 that was on one of them, which this is the English translation, but it says, "Under this heavy cross lies my poor mother-in-law. 3 more days should she have lived, I would lie, and she would read this cross. You who here are passing by, not to wake her up, please try, because if she comes back home, she'll scold me more, but I will surely behave, so she'll not return from grave. Stay here, my dear mother-in-law."
Okay.
So many of them, on the front, they talk about who they were in life, and on the
Right.
back, they'll show the person being hit by a bus or a train or
Oh my
whatever.
gosh.
So one man painted all of these. His name was Stan Patras. He died in 1977, and he has apprentices who have taken on his work. But there's also an Orthodox church on the property with the graveyard, and it is just stunning inside with the same vivid paintings inside the church as are on the crosses outside the church. And I could have stayed there all day. We didn't stay long enough. I would have loved to go with a guide who would have translated more of the Romanian,
Right.
because it was a very pleasant visit to a cemetery. And from there, we went to the Sighetu Village Museum, which is an open-air museum from the 1980s. It has over 30 of the typical wooden houses and barns and granaries and mills from all over the region, so you could see what past life in those structures looked like. They also showed the same colorful weavings. And we ended the day with a locally distilled palinka tasting with apple and sour cherry palinka. Now, I know palinka is a Hungarian thing, and I think the EU even made a rule that it can only be called palinka in Hungary, but they were calling it palinka. Accompanied, of course, by bread chunks with lard and onion.
Okay. Did you like the bread chunks with lard and onion? You didn't mention that before.
Not particularly. It goes against the grain to eat lard, but at least for Americans.
It is not something I normally eat, yes.
Yes. But the guide said that the bread and lard combination really helped workers get through the long days in the fields during the communist times. We heard a lot about the communist times from every guide that we met, and it's a very strong memory for them still. I was sad to leave Maramures, and I will go back. It was a really delightful stay there. And we moved on to Sighișoara. We took a private transfer, a van to Sighișoara. It was a short ride. It was probably a couple hours.
Okay.
So it was raining as we entered Sighișoara. And Sighișoara, it's Transylvania. It's known for maybe being the birthplace of Vlad Tepes. It felt very medieval and mystical. And the landscape, again, was these rolling hills bordered by the Carpathian Mountains, which are so striking, very verdant, very lush. With regard to Vlad Tepes, the town's most famous resident, his father did live in a house in the town center for a few years in the 1430s, which is now a restaurant, and you can go in. I didn't go in there, but apparently you can pay the wait staff to show you his room. Sources differ about whether he was actually born there, but there's a plaque on the wall, and there's a statue of Vlad Tepes in the town. An upper town and a lower town. The upper town is a UNESCO site, and the lower town is more nuts and bolts. There's some restaurants down there. There's a grocery store. I saw the residents of the town actually doing their shopping down there. So I would definitely visit both. In terms of the really scenic, preserved medieval town, that's in the upper town. It's a pleasure just to flaneur through that town. It's got these beautiful, quaint squares sprinkled throughout, where the guilds were, the commercial activities to take place, the markets were there. And so there's all these towers around the town where the guilds set up shop. So you've got, I think there are 7 left. So you have your boots makers guild, the ropes makers guild, and you can really get a sense for what the market place looked like back in medieval times.
Well, and I will make you define flaneur, although wonderful use of vocabulary word here.
I think that's a Baudelaire word, but it's a term for just wandering around and soaking in the surroundings and taking your time, really getting a sense for a place without any particular goal in mind.
Yep.
It's one of my favorite things to do when I'm traveling. It's very hilly there. So there's a covered stairway with 175 steps to the top of the town where you can visit. There's a school up there. There's another church up there, another really interesting cemetery, certainly not like the Mary Cemetery, but it was worth seeing and a little bit outside of the center of town. There was just goats up there munching in a bush. It seemed just very nice and peaceful up there.
This episode is brought to you by Amazon. Sometimes the most painful part of getting sick is the getting better part. Waiting on hold for an appointment, sitting in crowded waiting rooms, standing in line at the pharmacy, that's painful. Amazon One Medical and Amazon Pharmacy remove those painful parts of getting better with things like 24/7 virtual visits and prescriptions delivered to your door. Thanks to Amazon Pharmacy and Amazon One Medical, healthcare just got less painful.
And for those of you who are regular listeners who are getting deja vu, yes, we did just cover Sigishwara not that long ago. I'll put a link to that episode that was just about Transylvania. So we're overlapping episodes a bit here, but it's a place that when we talked about it last time, it made my list of places that I want to get to. So I wasn't too worried about covering it again.
You can definitely see the German Saxon influence of Transylvania in Sigishwara. And that was a good introduction to our next stop, which is Viskry. The Transylvanian Saxons were a German-speaking population that moved in during the Middle Ages, and you can see their influence all throughout the region. In terms of eating in Sigishwara, I would recommend eating papanasi, which is a donut covered in blueberry jam and sour cream. Very delicious. And then I guess we move on to Viskry.
Okay.
So we went by van from Sigishwara to Viskry, and that took about 45 minutes. Viskry was my favorite stop, other than the Mary Cemetery. It was my favorite town that we visited on this trip.
Okay.
Driving into this town, you feel like you've gone back in time. So you pull in, and there's just these square pastel houses with red tile roofs lining the roadway. Many of the houses have dates painted under the eaves when they were in the name of maybe the person who built them. And there's farm equipment in the yards. There's elderly women sitting on benches knitting together. They make socks and slippers, which you can buy in one of the houses. Apparently, they also ship them to Germany for sale, but it's a unique souvenir. And I came home with some really nice wool slippers and socks. Little known fact, King Charles loves Romania, and he, in fact, owns a couple of properties in Viskry.
Okay.
So there's a museum to him in one of the properties that he owns. It's a very small but very interesting museum that kind of outlines his connection with the region. He has a family connection because Queen Maria, who was the last queen of Romania, was a first cousin to King George V. But he visits Romania frequently, and he's called it unspoiled. He loves the nature and the diversity of the countryside. So I believe that one of his properties is a guest house, and people can stay there. I have the link that I can share with you.
Okay.
But the museum, as I said, it was small, but there was a really nice photo exhibit of some factories and child labor and pollution that he has cleaned up, supposedly a bit, that King Charles has donated a lot of money to clean up. And they had some poster-sized placards that showed his philanthropy. There was also a cafe there and a very friendly roaming cat. So Viskry has a fortified church, which is very emblematic of the Saxons, called the White Church. And that was a beautiful fortified building. It originated back to 1100, but then it was destroyed and rebuilt in various stages from the 13th to 15th century. But you could climb up to the top for just beautiful views of Viskry. It was a very narrow sort of rickety ladder to get to the top, but the views were worth it.
Well, and that is another UNESCO World Heritage Site.
Yeah. Yes. There's a lot of UNESCO sites in this area. Great museum with artifacts and clothing and furniture. I think my favorite thing about Viskry, though, was just staying in the houses and walking the streets. Several of the houses have guest rooms where tourists can stay. So Intrepid had our group split into a few different houses. And when we got there, I had no idea what to expect. Everyone else was tucked away in their room. And then our guide said to me, "So do you want a regular room or would you like the museum room?"
Okay. There's only one right answer to that question.
Of course, I would like the museum room, please. I have never in all of my travels stayed in a room like this. It literally felt like sleeping in a house museum. It was filled with antique and furniture and ceramics and lace, and it had a wood burning stove that were at winter I would have had to learn how to operate. But the best part was it had, do you know what the Saxon drawer beds are?
I can vaguely picture it, but please describe.
They're great. They're these huge pieces of furniture that can sleep four. So there's room for two on the top, and then there's a drawer that you pull out, and there's a mattress in the drawer for two more people.
Okay. It's like a
So I
trundle
slept in
bed.
a drawer. It's like a trundle bed, but it's not underneath the bed. It's like it pulls out from the center of the bed. And it was fantastic. The other thing that I loved about Viskry were the cows literally come home at 8 p.m.
Okay.
and they go out again at 6. They go out to the pasture. So we were having dinner at our host's house out in this cozy courtyard with an outdoor dining room and stacked wood and lots of homemade wine and palinka. And then at 8 p.m., we went out to see the cows coming in. So imagine you're looking down the street and hundreds of cows are just coming down the street, munching on the leaves of the trees, and their bells are ringing. And they just go down the street until they find the wooden gate that belongs to their house. And they all knew exactly where to go. And they returned home at the end of the day to go out again at 6. At 6 a.m., we could hear them going out again. One did not return, and there was a man who hopped on an ATV to go look for his cow. But all the other cows seemed to know where they lived.
Okay.
So I think that's the essence of Viskry. It was just a really special stay because tiny. It was tiny, but the Viskry as a town is also protected by UNESCO in addition to receiving funds from King Charles.
Okay.
So it's a very special place. And then I'm not going to cover the rest of the trip because you've covered it in great detail, but we went from Viskry to Brasov, which was wonderful. And then we ended in Bucharest. We did go to Bran Castle, which is very touristy, but highly recommend going there because how could you go there and not go to Bran Castle?
Mm-hmm.
So I did really enjoy that as well. And it was a wonderful trip. I can't wait to go back.
And then again, with this trip, did you have time in Bucharest? You did have a day in Bucharest to actually explore it with the
We
tour.
did. We had one day that we had a tour when we got there. And then the next day I had some time to just wander around a little bit. I was there on a Monday and almost everything in Bucharest is closed on Monday. So it was more flaneuring.
Well, we haven't covered it for some time. Any highlights from the unfortunately closed city of Bucharest when you were there?
The only thing that was going to be open was another open air museum, and it was a little ways out of town, and we opted not to go because I think it basically would have been like Viskry. It was a recreation of a town almost that we had already seen, and we tried to get Parliament tickets, and that was interesting because the Parliament supposedly is open on a Monday as well. But I visited the Parliament in Budapest, and I've been to the Reichstag in Berlin, and typically you can order tickets online and just provide your passport and you get a timed entry. But there was no option to do this in Bucharest. They had a phone number that you could call. Our guide told us that he would try it for us because it was notoriously difficult to get those tickets. So he tried several days in advance. He tried every single day leading up to that Monday. And he said that there was basically, he told us, there was one woman in there answering the phone. And if she goes out for a cigarette break, you're out of luck. We never were able to procure tickets to the Parliament. I was with a few stragglers from our tour and we just wandered around a little bit. We didn't do anything noteworthy.
It would be interesting to get in the Palace of the Parliament because that's that huge second largest government building in the world. I think second to the Pentagon,
Right.
way larger than it needs to be. But of course, it was a Ceausescu's monument for what he was trying to build here in terms of the communist Romania. So,
yeah, it is enormous.
I'm wondering if large portions of it are empty or if they've found ways to use all of it or not. I just have no idea. Oh, 70% of the building is empty, I read. So
interesting. That's interesting too, because our guide told us that in past times you could visit more and more of the rooms, and now it's been like, down to 9 rooms and 7 rooms, and yeah.
Yeah, it might be something that if you are going, especially on your own and have your time, you might want to book in advance to see if you can get those, because I suspect it would be interesting, a significant building, and especially towards the end of Ceausescu's reign. I picture him out on balconies in this building, and I don't know if I'm picturing the right building or not. His rather brutal end of his life and the end of the communist regime there was rather sudden.
Yes, it was. And that's actually a good point, because his house has been turned into a museum, and I would have loved to have visited that. But again, it was closed on Monday.
Interesting. Good to know. Cool. Anything else that we want to talk about in the portion of Hungary and Romania before we get to some of our wrap-up questions? Things you should know before you go on a trip like this?
I think we've covered it pretty well. Just go. It's wonderful.
It's on my list. I'm sitting here looking at the very tour you're doing because I will be in the region in November and I haven't decided what I'm going to do and need to see at least one new country, and I haven't been to Romania before. As we get to our wrap-up questions, I think you know what's coming here. You're standing in the prettiest spot on this whole trip. Where are you standing? What are you looking at?
I am in Maramures, looking out my guest house window at the mountains in the mist and listening to the sheep bells and the roosters and smelling that apple tree and watching a horse cart drive down the road.
Excellent. Rather than in Viscry smelling the cows walking down the street, or... As you were talking about that scene, I'm thinking that scene has other senses as well that would not be the same. And one thing that makes you laugh and say only in Romania or only in Hungary.
I was tied between 2 on this, but I think I have to go with the bread with the lard and onions as an appetizer with shots of palinka.
What was the other one? You have to let me know now.
The woman in the Parliament building stepping out for a cigarette break and not being able to get tickets.
Excellent. And if you had to summarize this whole trip in 3 words, what 3 words would you use?
I would say mystical, under-touristed, and colorful.
Excellent. Our guest again has been Lisa VanderVeen. And Lisa, if we sent people to Lisa VanderVeen Writes, do you have a post that you've written about this trip? I know you do some of your writing elsewhere.
Yeah, I don't have a blog, or I don't write travelogue per se. I write more a personal memoir and personal essay in the context of travel. So it's travel writing, but it's not travelogue type writing.
Yep. Thank you so much for coming on Amateur Traveler and sharing with us your love for Romania, or newfound love for Romania. It sounds like you're heading back there.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for having me. This was so much fun.
Thanks, as always, to the patrons of the show and the sponsors who help pay for my shoes. If you're interested in learning more about how you can become a patron of the show and what you will get, go to patreon.com/amateurtraveler. I heard recently from Rachel, and I'll read only part of her long letter because a lot of it was a pitch for an episode. So hopefully you'll hear from Rachel either on the blog or the podcast in the future. But in the other part of the letter, she says, "Hi, Chris. Apologies in advance for what will be a lengthy email if you read it all to the end. I always read all the way to the end. As a longtime fan of your travel podcast, I have often found myself composing emails to you in my head. And so below are many of the points I've considered communicating to you recently. Firstly, and belatedly, my condolences on the passing of your parents. Thanks so much. Secondly, I enjoyed what was possibly the best trip of my life to Tanzania last November. Heavily influenced by your podcast 757, my father and I traveled to Katavi and Mahali national parks as your guest Jen Curran did, and it was every bit as wild, remote, and incredible as we had hoped. We also visited and enjoyed Chumbe Island off Zanzibar, which you had featured on an earlier podcast, so thank you for your contribution to our wonderful experience. Closer to home, I enjoyed podcast 884 featuring Amber Haggerty. It is a testament to the accuracy of your show that a visitor, her, and a local, me, could share almost exactly a list of what the best things are to do in a certain area. One note is that the islands she visited off the coast of Wexford are called the Salties, as opposed to Salty Island, as in the Salty Sauna in Kilmore Key. And Rachel is referring to the episode we did on Southeast Ireland. Thanks so much, Rachel, for writing, and it's so great to know that you were able to use some of the things we've done on the show. In terms of what's new on the Amateur Traveler website, I have a couple new blog posts, which I think I may have mentioned last week, but I'll say them again. One was 22 Budapest travel tips, a complete guide, and the other one was written by me, Discover St. Augustine's Historic Sites, which I got out in time for the episode that we did on St. Augustine. And I am off to Wisconsin this week on a press trip, but did not want to skip a week. And with that, we're going to end this episode of Amateur Traveler. If you have any questions, send an email to host@amateurtraveler.com, or better yet, leave a comment on this episode at amateurtraveler.com. And thanks so much for listening.